Well, hello again, GBC fam. All right, this week we are picking up our discussion of the 10 Commandments with the fourth and the fifth commandment, as discussed in question and answer 10 of the Catechism. So let's go there and read that together. Question: what does God require in the fourth and fifth commandments? Answer: fourth, that on the Sabbath day we spend time in public and private worship of God, rest from routine employment, serve the Lord and others, and so anticipate the eternal Sabbath. Fifth, that we love and honor our father and our mother, submitting to their godly discipline and direction. All right, like last week, we're going to address each of these commandments individually, all right? So we're going to start with the fourth commandment, which first appears in Exodus 20, verse 8, and it says this: remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. So it's short and sweet. But what does it mean to remember the Sabbath day and to keep it holy? Well, helpfully, this command is unique in the way that it is worded. And this commandment is followed by a paragraph explaining the how and the why of the commandment. All right, so Exodus 20 goes on. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the seventh day is the Sabbath to the Lord your God. On it you shall not do any work, you or your son or your daughter, your male servant or your female servant, your livestock or the sojourner who is within your gates. Okay, so the how of obeying this command is to rest from the grind and the hustle of everyday life. And it's a household-wide command. It's not just for parents and their children. If you employ anyone or have a staff, they are afforded the right to the Sabbath as well. And if you have any animals that work for you, they also get to have the Sabbath. All right? And then we move on to the why. Exodus 20 goes on. For in 6 days the Lord made heaven and earth, the sea and all that is in them, and rested on the seventh day. Therefore, the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and made it holy. Okay, so here, what's being communicated is that this idea of Sabbath rest and a rhythm of work and rest is part of God's good design for life and flourishing. And that was before the fall into sin. Okay, so this is part of God's original good design for life. But look what happens in the second time that this law is given, all right? And just for context, quickly, kids, in Exodus 20, when the 10 Commandments are first given, Israel had just come out of slavery in Egypt, all right? So they were fresh out of being delivered and taken through the Red Sea, and they're at Sinai, and they're learning now about who God is and how to be his people, right? But then what happens? They head off to the land, towards the land of Canaan, and on their way across the desert, they forget who God is, and they turn their backs on him, and they grumble against him. And as punishment for that, that generation of adults was not going to be able to enter the land of Canaan. And so instead, they have to wander around the wilderness for 40 years, waiting for that generation to die off before the rest of them, their children, could move into the land of Canaan. And so in Deuteronomy, we have that younger generation now finally ready. They're in Moab. They're ready to cross the Jordan River into the land of Canaan. And Moses is now teaching and instructing them and reiterating everything that was taught to them, to their parents at Sinai. Okay? And so when he gets to the fourth commandment, the command and the how are essentially identical. But when he gets to the why, it's totally different. Listen to this. He says, you shall remember that you were a slave in the land of Egypt, and the Lord your God brought you out from there with a mighty hand and an outstretched arm. Therefore, the Lord your God commanded you to keep the Sabbath day. Okay, so the first time around, therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and made it holy, it was because he rested after he created the earth and everything in it, right? This time, therefore, the Lord your God commanded you to keep the Sabbath days because you are to remember that you were a slave in the land of Egypt and that God delivered you miraculously, okay? So for ethnic Israel, for Israel at this point in history, this is a return back to God's good pattern for life and flourishing. They're being reminded of their deliverance from slavery in Egypt, that their parents and their grandparents who were in slavery for 450 some odd years, these are people who would have had no concept of rest whatsoever, right? It's not like Pharaoh was giving them the weekends off. And so this is an incredible gift. The Sabbath day is an incredible celebration of that freedom. And so Moses reminds this generation, who might have forgotten all about that because they were so young at the time, some of them probably not even born yet, that's what you're celebrating. All right. And it's emphasized that it's this incredible gift from God. And I think, Jesus kind of reiterates that in Mark 2 when the Pharisees, challenge him for allowing his disciples to roll grain in their fingers for a little snack on the Sabbath. Jesus says to them, the Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. So it is a gift from God to us. All right, and now, but we aren't Israel. We're not waiting to enter into Canaan, and we didn't come out of slavery in Egypt. So what are we to make of this? What are we remembering? What are we celebrating on the Sabbath? For us, as spiritual Israel, the way that we remember the Sabbath is with a joyful, whole person, nourishing celebration of our deliverance from the slavery to sin and death by the redeeming work of Jesus on the cross, right? And that's why we celebrate the Sabbath on Sunday, not on Saturday, as was the custom in the Old Testament. Sunday is the day that Jesus rose from the dead. And so it's the Lord's Day. That's the day that we celebrate by remembering our deliverance through his redeeming work, all right? We're invited to begin our week by resting from the hustle and bustle and cares and worries of everyday life, to be nourished and strengthened as we're reminded of who God is, who we are, and what he's accomplished on our behalf. We then build the rhythms of our life out from and around this weekly remembrance and reorientation. And in so doing, we keep first things first, right? This actually empowers us to obey the rest of the commands. Okay, number 5, right? Commandment number 5. This is Exodus 20, verse 12. Honor your father and your mother, that your days may be long in the land that the Lord your God is giving you. Okay, honor your mother and father. But then what's up with this long days in the land stuff, right? What does that mean? Well, that is the functional why of this command, particularly for ethnic Israel. And the Apostle Paul in Ephesians 6, when he reiterates this command, he says this is the first command with a promise. You see, in the context of the giving of the 10 Commandments, Israel would have understood that their success, the peace and prosperity that they would enjoy in the land, was dependent upon their faithfulness and obedience to the terms of their covenant relationship with God. Okay? God promised blessing and provision for obedience to the covenant commands, and he promised curses and discipline for disobedience. And so it was very necessary for them to obey these commands in order for them to live long and prosperous lives in the promised land. Right? But again, we're not Israel. We are not waiting to enter into the land of Canaan, and our context is entirely different. So our interpretation of this promise has to be a little bit different, but I'm going to come back to that in a second. First, I want to address this. Kids, you may think it's a bummer that this is a command that seems to only be for you and not for your parents, but I would argue that this commandment has implicit in it an important, very important command for your parents as well. And Moses makes this very clear in Deuteronomy when he is giving this command again for the second time, because in chapter 4, immediately before, he says, take care and keep your soul diligently, lest you forget the things that your eyes have seen, lest they depart from your heart all the days of your life. Make them known to your children and your children's children. All right? And then again, he reiterates that after chapter 5, where he gives the 10 Commandments. Chapter 6, he says, and these words that I command you today shall be on your heart. You shall teach them diligently to your children, and shall talk of them when you sit in your house, when you walk by the way, and when you lie down, and when you rise. So kids, your parents have been given the incredibly important task of teaching you these things, the knowledge of God, the knowledge of what it means to live a life of obedience pleasing to Him. Okay? But yeah, to come back, that was a sidebar. Now back, we're not ethnic Israel. We're not waiting to enter into Canaan. So what does this promise of long life in the land mean for us? Consider what Paul, the Apostle Paul, says to his apprentice Timothy in 2 Timothy 3. He says, "But as for you, continue in what you have learned and have firmly believed, knowing from whom you learned it, and how from childhood you have been acquainted with the sacred writings, which are able to make you wise for salvation through faith in Christ Jesus." The words of the Lord, the law, all of this here is able to make you wise for salvation in Jesus Christ. And those who receive that salvation enter into the eternal rest of the new heaven and the new earth, the true promised land. That is why it is so important to be instructed in these things. So kids, I know that some of you are pretty smart, really smart, but I can assure you that if you're kids, your parents have been around the block a few more times than you have, and they've seen some things that you haven't seen. They've learned some lessons that you haven't learned. And so submit yourself to their instruction and their teaching in all things that pertain to living a life pleasing to God. And in so doing, you will be honoring God Himself. And the rewards for that are eternal. All right, that's it for this week. I'll see you next week.